morning. Does the sound seem okay? All right. I've already knocked this thing off twice, so we'll see. All right. Now, those of you who know me might be thinking, and rightfully so, Sharon is speaking about mindful communication. Well, because that's not been a hallmark of my life so far, up until now. Up until now. But you know what Jesus said. He said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, sometimes folks teach what they most need to learn." And that's yeah. I mean, we don't really know he said all that other stuff anyway, so, you know, this is just as good as the rest, as far as I think. Okay. Now, I really prefer to speak from the heart and not use notes, but today is a big note day. So, it's the way it is, just the way it is. And I'm going to focus on, first, the methods of communicating mindfully that were proposed by Marshall Rosenberg in the book Nonviolent Communication. Some of you may be familiar with this. He passed away a couple years ago, but for decades, actually, he gave workshops all over the world and did interventions all over the world using this method of teaching people to speak and communicate in a more mindful, compassionate way. And it's kind of a complicated process, really. It takes a lot of practice. So I also, although I was focusing on nonviolent communication, which I'll call NVC, I found myself being really attracted to Buddhist thought on the matter as well, because right speech is part of the Eightfold Path, you know, and so it's an important tenet of Buddhism as well. So I read things and watched videos by Buddhist teachers such as Tara Brach and Sharon and other lesser-known people. And so that also is something that I've been working with. So I kind of have two things going on here, and they have the same end, but the methods are kind of different. So first, I'll give a little bit more information about NVC, nonviolent communication, because I happen to have some information on that. All right. So it's about giving from the heart. It's a very cognitive approach to heart-centered meditation, or heart-centered communication, heart-centered everything. But it's a pretty cognitive approach, which I think is because you have to follow certain patterns of speech that Rosenberg created in order to do it. But just to know what it is can influence our intentions. And that's what it's done for me. Like, I have the intention of learning to be more mindful in my speech. I have that intention. And I often fall short, but that's, you know, that's human experience. That's human practice. Although I might fall short a little more than some other humans who are practicing, but still, it's human experience, all right? And it's not just about learning to say positive things either, but it's learning how to make relationship the center of our communication, the desire to connect with people rather than the desire to be right. Oh, yeah. So, Marshall talks about that, desire to be right, and he calls it life-alienating communication, and it's what most of us have been brought up in. It's what most of American culture, anyway, some other cultures, is centered on being right. Who won? Who won the game? Somebody lost if somebody won. Who's right? Somebody's wrong if somebody's right. And, you know, we are brought up in that. And since I was born with a red pen in my hand, left hand. I've always been into that. I mean, years ago, I had friends give me their own writing and ask me to evaluate it, and I gave it back to them with all these grammatical corrections. They were really not very happy with me, and people stopped giving me their writing to read. So, but I thought that was my mission in life, so I had to do it. Making corrections. I'm still kind of what they call on Facebook a grammar Nazi, but most of them need to have some of that in their lives, I think. But, that's not very mindful. Wait. Well, you know, apostrophes, things like that, but, oh well. I guess we have to just accept our culture sometimes. So we often try to blame someone else, blame ourselves, just demonize somebody or something. And the media does that all the time. Something went wrong, oh, who's to blame? Fire them, you know. Or who's to blame? Let them stay another 2 years. It just depends. But we have that, still have that as our guide, sort of. Someone's to blame. But in NVC, we are to communicate with honesty and empathy, which calls forth what Marshall Rosenberg calls our natural honesty. So I'll just say believes. He's on the other side, but you know, he's around. So Marshall believes that people have innate honesty, and that our culture and our methods of education, our methods of bringing up kids, sort of make us forget that and make us get into the idea that if we do what's right, then we'll be rewarded, and if we don't do what's right, we will be punished. You know, mom and he uses puppets, and one of them is a jackal, and the other one is a giraffe. And the jackal is not very mindful, as you might imagine. He's just a symbol, but he is not very mindful. I don't have puppets. I wish I did. You have jackal and giraffe puppets in your car? Oh, okay. She could have. We never know. I know. Okay. So the jackal is not mindful. His communication is life alienating. And the giraffe is mindful. I'll say her. Okay, I don't know what to say. Her communication is intended to be mindful and to seek. The giraffe is seeking connection, and the jackal is seeking to be right and to blame. All right. And we all know both of those stances. We all have those feelings and experiences within us, I'm sure, because it's part of humanity, that especially being brought up in this culture. Maybe a little bit less so in some other cultures, but still very much there. So we need to make a commitment, because we haven't been brought up to seek communion, community in our relationships necessarily. We need to practice, and we need to set an intention if we want to do that. We need to make a commitment to increasing our awareness of our own feelings and needs. And those are two aspects of not nonverbal, that counts too, nonviolent communication. Sometimes it is nonverbal as well. So components have to do with observation, just seeing what is there and separating that from evaluation. Not easy for us, because we see something and we go, whoa, ugly, whoa, beautiful, good, bad. So it's about practicing just seeing what's there, and then any evaluation is a separate thing, because the next thing is feelings. And he points out how a lot of times we use the word feel instead of think, but this is not about think. Think would be more observation, but feel is our emotions, our inner feelings. And in this book, he gives a long list of feelings for people who aren't quite sure what they feel. So there are really a lot of them. And that is, it is needed because a lot of times we only have a few. Here's some of them. But we might say, I feel good, I feel bad. But we can feel embittered, ashamed, glorious, buoyant, ecstatic, resentful. That's just a few. So, and a lot of times we also use words that aren't really feelings because they would be a result of someone else's action, such as I felt abandoned. Well, that abandoned isn't really a feeling because it takes someone else to, that's saying someone did this to me. So another thing that is different in practice. So, but I feel sad, I feel terrified. Those can be feelings, many feelings. So we have observation separated from evaluation. We have feelings and we have needs. And the needs can be for safety, for love. These are our basic needs, okay? It's not for, I have a need for a Cadillac Escalade or something. That's different. But we could have, certainly we might have a need for transportation, but it's not about things, really. It's about what we need to feel safe. So that we have to feel safe if we're going to place community and communion and connection as our desire. We aren't going to do that if we don't feel safe. So we have the components of observations, feelings, needs, and the fourth one is requests. And that is, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what do I really need in this situation to make me feel safe and loved? And so requests, all of these things you have to learn to separate them. And for most of us, it's all a big muddle, kind of our feelings, our needs, our desires, our wants. This is, for me anyway, I know it's not it's not separated in my way of thinking. So we have to practice that too, as well. So a request is going to be asking someone to do something specific in order for me to feel that my needs are met. Very specific and unconditional. Because if the person doesn't want to do it, then you have to just deal with that and go from there in the process of communication. But we don't make a demand because that doesn't make anyone feel safe. So, and a lot of times we do make demands of people and of ourselves. But if we want to feel safe, we request things, and then we have to practice releasing the outcome. And Marshall says that if we can do this, we will be making life wonderful. And I think that's true, and it does go along with other practices, especially Buddhists, but there are others too for communication, making life wonderful, because it is about releasing our specific expectations. If I expect that you're going to do this, then if you don't, I feel hurt. Typically, or I might feel angry, resentful. So it's about requesting something and letting go of the outcome. And so in some way, this is about detaching from our ego. But not to say that ego is bad. We humans we need an ego if we're going to live on earth in these bodies. But just to say that awareness that the ego is often fear-based, because that's what we're used to. If someone doesn't do this, then I'm going to be upset. That's fear-based, and that's often typical of certain situations and our way of dealing with them. So detaching from the ego and realizing that we are more than that, which in Unity we teach that. You know, we use different terms than Marshall Rosenberg, and even some of different terms than Buddhists, but we teach that we are not these bodies, we are not fear-based, that we are of spirit, we are of God, and that we are expressions of what we call the Christ spirit, the Christ within, not meaning Jesus, but he modeled it, especially when he said, "Verily I say unto you," some folks are going to, you know what I said earlier. He models that, but it's not that we have a little Jesus in us, but we are expressions of the Christ. We are in the nature of the Christ. And the more we learn that, then the more we can naturally gravitate to communication that is similar to what I'm talking about, because we will not be basing everything on fear, which we've mostly been brought up to do. So, life-alienating communication blocks compassion, and it's what many of us have grown up with. And Marshall calls this violent. He doesn't even mean physical violence. He means violent in the sense of alienating the other person, of not making someone feel safe and not making ourselves feel safe. He uses violence in that sense. So when we have moralistic judgments implying rightness and wrongness, when we criticize others, put labels on them, use put-downs, blames, insults, comparisons, and diagnoses, these are forms of judgment, and they can be our opinions, but they are not centered in connection. You're too selfish, she's too lazy, they're prejudiced, and so forth. Okay. And yes, we do that, and some of it, I'm not in a place where I know how we avoid that yet, but apparently it's possible, okay? I mean, how could, it's just, if I say someone's biased, I don't really know yet how I rise above that, but apparently it's possible. That's just where I am. And then we also can deny our own responsibility, okay, and blame it on other people. Well, if they would do this, then I would be okay. And I had to do that. I had to tell that lie. It was a little white lie. I had to do it. I had to do this because other people did it, and so forth. That's, of course, not taking responsibility for ourselves. And communicating in desires, our desires as demands. Well, it can be implicit rather than direct, but if we're asking someone to do something, well, we're really telling them that if they don't, we will withhold something, our love, our respect, our admiration, our presence, whatever it may be. That's not a request, it's a demand. So we have to learn to recognize our feelings, learn to take responsibility for our feelings, learn to follow certain patterns of speech that will enable us to connect more readily with people and to empathize with people and with ourselves. So this is a language of compassion. And it is, we don't say that we don't have anger, but we learn to express it without pointing it at others. So, and next year I'll give a talk on how we do that. Okay, but these are the guidelines. And also in expressing appreciation, Marshall doesn't want us to give compliments or to give put-downs, because he says they're two sides of the same coin, and that's a real challenge too. So the three components of appreciation are the actions that have contributed to our well-being, what you did, how it affected me. Okay? Not your dress is pretty, but, my dress is pretty, but not that. It's like, what you did has made me feel loved or safe or has made me happy, whatever. My response, that's my response, okay? Not because, I didn't really say that quite right. My response to what you did is to feel happy, because I don't want to say it's because of you, because that's codependent. So that's not part of it either, right? And so we have to do this, learn to do this gracefully and with empathy, and as equals, not with feelings of superiority or false humility. Okay, so those are some of the tenets of NVC, and now I will talk of some of the practices from the little that I know, but I'm very interested in Buddhism, practices of metta, loving kindness, practices of compassion for ourselves and others. So the goal is really very similar to the NVC goal, but different. And one thing that I noticed is when I was watching Tara Brach, who is a Buddhist teacher, pretty well known, very well known, is that when she speaks quietly, calmly. She speaks from presence. She doesn't do a dog and pony show. She doesn't get people riled up and excited because she speaks from presence. And that made me think about what a dynamic speaker or a dynamic person is. Because we have that in our ministerial search. We have a few things, our affirmation for our ministerial search, and we say a dynamic speaker. But it's interesting to contemplate what that means. Does it always mean someone that is a cheerleader? It might. Rah-rah and getting us psyched up. It might. But when I watched Tara Brach, I think she's very dynamic. She's coming from the center. She's coming from her heart. She's quiet, but she's dynamic. So if we can listen carefully enough, we might realize that we can be inspired by quiet and calm, that it isn't always someone who's real excited, but it can be. But we have to listen. We have to listen maybe even beyond the words to get that. So dynamic can mean positive in energy, but it might not be high energy. It might just be deep energy. Okay. So in Buddhism, steps to increasing mindful communication, we need to make a commitment, and we need to learn to pause. Oh my goodness. I have wanted to learn to pause for years, but it still hasn't happened very often. Pause before I say something, because my history is thoughts just jump out. If it's here, I just say it a lot of times. Sometimes that's funny, and sometimes it's not. So I want to learn to pause, because the pause, the silence in Buddhism is part of the communication. It is important. In fact, some teachers say that that's where our power is, in the pause, in the silence, even more than in what we say. So commitment to mindful communication, pausing, and just realizing stimulus and response, and there is space. There is space. That is wisdom. There is space between stimulus and response. And I do want to tell you that next week we have a speaker who's going to talk about that. And none of you probably know her, even I don't. It's Reverend Mary Wood from Ontario, Canada, and she will be at Unity Village. But you know Martha Creek, a lot of you, and right? Martha Creek, who's been here, wonderful speaker. Well, she wrote to me and said, I want you to know Mary Wood, because she's going to be at the village, and you guys need to hear her. So we connected, and Mary's going to speak, and her title of her talk next week is A Little R&R, but it doesn't mean rest and relaxation. It means response or react. Okay, so it's going to dovetail nicely with this. And what I heard from other ministers about Reverend Mary Wood as a speaker is, she's a hoot. That's what I heard. Okay, so we have to come back and see what she has to say about that, since she's a hoot, and I'm sure she is. So that will be fun, all right? And that is part of what I'm talking about as well. So responding rather than reacting, because we put a space in between the stimulus and the response. And this is very, very important. So some Buddhist teachers have had a lot to say about this, but one of them is catch emotions, catch our feelings in the net of mindfulness, and then examine them before we act. I'm going to repeat that. Catch emotions in the net of mindfulness, and then examine them before we act. Good advice. Pema Chodron, another of my favorite Buddhist writers and teachers, says, compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves. We start with ourselves. Compassion, kindness, empathy with ourselves. And she also said, only when we know our own darkness well can we be present for the darkness of others. And that is about shadow work, which many of us did last year with Reverend Cherie. Shadow work, looking at the things that might be frightening or might be, oh, that's negative, whatever, for ourselves, until we can accept them as part of ourselves and allow them to shift. In that way, we can be present for the darkness of others. If we know nothing of our own shadow, then we're not going to have that empathy for others when they're very, very sad or down or ill, all these other things that, we experience in life. So, set an intention to speak from presence, and presence is the same as our Christ nature in unity. And my wish now is that we all learn to recognize, trust, and speak from the loving presence that is our true nature. Thank you. So it is.